Listening to the Real in the Field Goals podcast. I am one of your hosts, Kenneth Arthur. The Real in the Field Goals podcast is a Seahawks weekly podcast every Thursday, sometimes Friday, and it comes out every week. We're talking Seahawks. We're getting great guests every week, and this, of course, is from fieldgoals.com. I'm Kenneth Arthur. As I said before, I write there, I write Rolling Stone, the AV Club, Sports on Earth, and the co-host is Danny Kelly. Danny, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kenny. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Danny, of course, managing editor of Field Goals and constantly, tirelessly writing for SBNation.com. And so, like I said, it's July 23rd. And if you know, then you know that training camp starts on July 31st. Calendar experts will tell you that that is 1 week from tomorrow. Math experts, they'll say it's 8 days from today. So we're right there around the corner. Russell Wilson's agent might tell you that, this is it. This is the deadline. He's going to be in town. Let's talk about this contract. And then once training camp begins, Wilson, he may be laser focused on those practices, laser focused with his lasers coming out of his eyes. That's a robot reference. And then that's basically, then it could be a long wait. The day that Russell Wilson signs his contract, he will be the second happiest person in the world. Because the first person that will be happy will be me, because I made a vow to write about Russell Wilson every day until he signs that contract. Today was day 23 of that vow, and I would love it if it ended somewhere around day 30. Our guest today, Davis Hsu, he's also a writer at Field Goals. He knows everything about the salary cap. He knows everything about Russell Wilson. That is strictly what we're talking about today. It's a Russell Wilson podcast, Russell Wilson chat. Davis, let's just start off right at the top. For anybody that's uninitiated, who is Russell Wilson?
Who's Russell Wilson?
Yeah, I'm not familiar myself.
Dating an R&B star.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
It's been quite a musical offseason. We got the C-Mike mixtape. We got Russell Wilson and Ciara. It's been a pretty musical thing going on. But on a serious note, Russell Wilson, the situation, what do you know, Davis, as far as the latest reports with the contract situation, and what is your gut feeling and what's going to happen in the next week?
I think Danny and I got some information, 3 or 4 weeks ago from someone that we trust. And at that point, he said that it was kind of down to guaranteed money. And it was, I think the number he threw out there was 53 or 54 million was what the Seahawks were offering, and Russell Wilson wanted 75 million fully guaranteed. Now this isn't, when they say the total guarantees, which they say in contracts, no, we're talking full guarantees, which is very different. A lot of the total guarantees, in a year it would kick in, and we're actually talking real deal full guarantees. The highest in the league was $54 million. Aaron Rodgers received that a couple years ago. And according to Jason Cole, on the 15th of July, he said that was the Seahawks, offered $54 million fully guaranteed. And Mike Holmgren went on KJR, and he basically kind of seemed he didn't give full numbers, but it almost seemed like the offer was fair, and it seemed really competitive, and that Wilson wanted much more than that. So we had heard that the whisper number that the Seahawks were hoping he would take would be $61 million. And I don't know if that's something that
in full guarantees
he would take. We also heard that Seahawks would not give him the $75 million fully guaranteed. And I don't really know if it's because of the escrow thing, or if it's because someone has 2 concussions and what happens to a player, and then are you really on the hook for $75 million, or just doing bad business of giving someone $75 million fully guaranteed when the highest ever given was given to the best player in the game at $54 million. You're blowing that number out by 39% or whatever that is.
I mean, we're talking about this is negotiation, right? I mean, if that's what they started with the 75, which it would be mind blowing if that news broke that the Seahawks gave him $75 million guaranteed, and then fans started to realize how much bigger that is than the biggest guarantee of all time. I mean, fans, especially fans that are not fans of the Seahawks, and some that are fans of the Seahawks would flip their shit. It's that high, but that's negotiation, right? You start at a high number, and then you get to $61 million, which is still the record.
Yeah, and I think the Seahawks would do the 61, but I've also heard that they just won't do the 75. So I think we really have a week to see if they would really give the 61, if Russell would really take the 61, and we'll see. We have about a week to go, and there's really no reason to sign the deal before the very last day.
Yeah.
If you're Russell Wilson, and then if it goes by there and he's like, no, I'm dead. I want $75 million fully guaranteed. And it really seemed it came down to that. It didn't seem like it was an APY or a new money APY, or it didn't seem like that was the sticking point. It seemed like it came down to just flat out full guarantees. We had also heard, and Danny, I think you remember this, that he had never asked for a fully guaranteed contract, that he had never asked for that. So
Right.
I just thought that was an interesting tidbit as well.
Yeah, and it's hard to sort through all the different reports because there's been a lot, but as far as I know, that the Jason Cole stuff has kind of jived what we've heard, off the record, and so it's just been interesting to see where the different things go. And do you buy that it's a soft deadline on the 30th or the 31st, whatever? That do you think he wouldn't negotiate during the season?
I think they would, but I think it's good to tell the media and the fans that there is a deadline. That way they don't have to answer questions every single day, which is what's going to happen for both Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson. So I don't know, but I think that's a good thing for both sides, I think, to have that out there.
And just gun to your head, have to answer right now, do you think it's going to get done before the 30th?
I think no.
Okay.
I think no this year. I don't know. I could be wrong. It wouldn't shock me if they pulled it off, just like you saw the Dez Bryant deal come together on the last day. You saw the Demaryius Thomas deal. I mean, that happens. So that wouldn't shock me at all, but I wouldn't bet, I wouldn't bet on that. I wouldn't bet a large sum of money on that.
And if it doesn't get done, if he decides to play the season on his, rookie contract, the $1.5 million this year, there's been a lot of questions about this. Like, is that bad for Wilson, and is that better for the Seahawks, or what is, like, who benefits from that? Is that actually good for Wilson, or is that actually losing him money in the long run?
I think it would lose him money in the long run, because the reality is he thinks he can make up the whatever 15 or 19 million or whatever it might be on the back end or on his next deal, and it's like, I don't know if that'll really happen.
Yeah.
If he'll really make that up over time, or how you could kind of make the numbers work that you actually could make that up. So I think it actually would benefit the team, because even if they had to pay him more, are they going to really pay him $19 million more? I don't know. That seems like a lot more, over a 4 or 5 year period.
Davis, just some broad strokes contract talk, and even I sometimes have a hard time remembering how it all works, but how much can you give a player in signing bonus? Does the signing bonus not translate to a cap hit? Is it going to be work in a way that, Russell Wilson can get a bunch of money up front, and that money won't change his 2015 cap hit or 2016? Like, how does it all work with the signing bonus?
$30 million signing bonus. Let's say you did a 5-year contract. You could divide that $30 million over 5 years, which is 6. So basically, his cap hit this year would only go up 6. Even if he signed a 7 or 8 year deal, like I think Tyron Smith signed like an 8-year deal, the CBA limits you that you can only prorate a signing bonus over 5 years max. So even though, and 6-year deals are more common than an 8-year deal. So even if you signed a 6-year deal, you can only prorate it, your signing bonus over 5. So let's say Russell Wilson does a 5-year total deal. Let's say his signing bonus is $20 million, then you would prorate $4 million per year. If it was $30 million, it would be, I guess, 6 per year, if that makes sense.
And if you're, for one of the things that also isn't it important for guys, because it's not something that every quarterback is getting, but isn't it important what you're going to get after the first 3 years? Because most quarterbacks feel comfortable believing they will, be there for 3 years. So as much money up front as possible.
So you're saying that the 3-year cash number is a number to look at it, if that's your question. Yes, the 3-year cash number. The 3-year cash would basically be your signing bonus, your salary in your first 3 years, and then any additional bonuses, roster bonuses you would get. So yeah, that 3-year number is an important number for quarterbacks.
And is that because is the one of the main reasons for that because a lot of these guys get renegotiated after 3 years and basically want to make sure they get as much money as they can in that first deal before they renegotiate?
The reason why it's so important is because that 3-year number is typically they're almost going to be locked to be on the team for the first 3 years, whereas year 4, their guaranteed money is usually not extending into year 4 typically. And so, and even in year 4, even though they don't have guaranteed money, they probably won't be cut. Number one, because they're a quarterback, and number two, they might have a huge dead money hit for the team. So it's kind of like, even in year 4, that they're probably going to still be there. By year 5, yeah, it's not something you really want to bank on.
And this is, the Seahawks fans haven't really gotten a lot of experience with the whole franchise quarterback signing extensions thing. Obviously, it's been a while. It took them a while to find someone. And, now it's been 3 years with Russell Wilson, so we don't really know. Is this a situation, is this a normal situation for, going forward with a franchise quarterback, or is this sort of something abnormal as far as you know?
I think it is different. I think when you have a team like the Carolina Panthers and Cam Newton, and I would like to say Cam Newton, number one, was drafted a year ahead of Russell Wilson. I think sometimes we forget that and think they came in the same year. Number two, he was the first pick of the draft in the first round. So, and by being a first round pick in the new CBA, I guess Cam Newton could be considered the very first pick of the new CBA. In a sense, even though it actually happened before the new CBA, but in a sense, he was like the first person in this 2011 class where things changed. And he had the 5th-year option. So not only did he come in a year ahead, he also had the 5th-year option, and he still made probably $4 or $5 million per year, which was a lot less than Sam Bradford, but still, him and Andrew Luck make a lot more than most rookies, and definitely more than Russell Wilson. So I think it's very unique in that it's not a Joe Flacco, Matt Ryan scenario where they were first-round picks in the old CBA. It's not a Sam Bradford scenario where he's sort of an injury bust, so to speak, or it's a Cam Newton where it's new CBA, but you got the 5th-year option. Andrew Luck would fit in that category.
Mm-hmm.
But he's definitely a better quarterback than Colin Kaepernick and Andy Dalton. I bring them up because they were new CBA non-first rounders. Okay.
Yeah.
Kaepernick and Dalton. So and then Ryan Tannehill again, who's probably more in that 3rd-tier category.
Right.
Of players, and he is new CBA. But again, the team had a 5th-year option to control him. So having that extra year of control, I think, is kind of a game changer because the team not only does they have the 5th-year option, but then they could tag you 2 years or 3 years beyond that.
Yeah.
So really, they have a lot more control over you, and versus a 3rd-round player which has the 4 years, there's no 5th-year option, and again, how many good quarterbacks are there drafted in the 3rd round? They're just never this good, really.
Yeah.
Davis, I know that
but, it's just really, really. So I do think it's different because it's a high-profile player, a 3rd rounder, new CBA. It's a pretty unique situation, I think.
Davis, I don't feel like I remember.
So that you could pay money to, and so I do think it's unique.
Davis.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Just wasn't sure if my mic was on or not. Davis,
we're pros.
I don't feel like I remember I don't know. It just seems like maybe it's just because I wasn't paying attention. It didn't matter to me. I just wanted to watch the games, but I don't feel like these constant carousel of quarterback contracts was coming as fast and furious as it is now. And now it's like, this guy's got a new contract. This guy's got a new contract. And it's topping it. It's topping it. It's topping it. The situation with Russell Wilson, it seems similar to the one with Drew Brees a few years ago, which did end up in a franchise tag is this a situation with Wilson? Is this normal? Is this how it goes? Or is it a unique situation because he's in such a unique position due to the fact that he's not making any money relatively?
Yeah, the fact that he's not making any money relatively, I think that is a factor, because from the Seahawks perspective, if they were giving him a contract like what Big Ben, I think he got 21.7, and that happened this year. So you can't say it's an old contract. He got $88 million or something like that over a 4-year extension. The big difference is that Big Ben was already due $11 million in the last year of his deal. So when you add up the 11 and the 88 or something, it ended up being like 101. And there's probably some rounding error there. And so overall, it's like, $100 million over 5 years, and it looks really substantial. But again, he was already owed the other $11 million, and so for Wilson to want a 5-year, deal, $100 million, where the Seahawks are really like, no, if we gave you $90 million, over the next 4. Plus this year, which we're going to keep at the same number, we'll give you a signing bonus, but we're going to pay you that same base. That's really how we should look at it. So I do think his low base this year is a factor. And again, all the other first-round draft picks had decent salaries in their final year of their contract, or they were looking at a 5th-year option, which was like a transition tag number. So not as good as a franchise tag, but pretty significant, probably, $13, $15 million. So I do think the fact that he's at 1.5 is very different than almost any other scenario. Joe Flacco, Matt Ryan, they weren't going to earn $1.5 million in any year that they ever played, whether they were on their rookie deal, or their second deal. Plus, Wilson, if he didn't get his performance bonus, he'd be only getting paid like $700,000 or something. So
wow.
Even that 1.5 is because they pay you. If you're a J.R. Sweezy or a K.J. Wright or a Cam Chancellor or Russell Wilson, if you're a 3rd-round pick or below and you play a lot of snaps, they boost up your 4th-year pay to the lowest RFA tender, which is about 1.5. That's the only reason why he's even getting 1.5 is because, he's totally outperformed, his snaps of what, the NFL seems to be typical of a 3rd, 4th, 5th-round player.
It's funny because it's on this new CBA, people talk about how rookies on rookie contracts, no one's really getting paid all that much. But I think I saw a stat, or not a stat. I saw that Jameis Winston's actually going to make more money in his rookie season than Russell Wilson's made on his entire rookie contract.
Well, the first pick, Danny, still gets.
They still get a lot. Okay.
Year.
Yeah.
And it's the first pick of the draft. So now, by the time you get down to the 25th pick, or in the playoff teams,
it's quite a bit
now
smaller.
You're down to like $2 million a year, and
okay.
It drops off.
Yeah.
So, but he's still the first pick of the draft. So, they're still signing $4 or $5 million per year type deal.
It is a really unique situation.
The factor is very high. I think it might be fully guaranteed or almost fully guaranteed. So.
I mean, isn't that it is kind of weird when you think about it. I never put it in this sort of context, but yeah, just to think of, like, if an ad agency hired 300 kids coming out of college and then they just said, well, we're not going to pay any of you really the same. We're just going to go off of who we like the most. And then we are going to get paid, someone at the top of the class is going to get paid X amount of dollars. And then the 31st person in the class will pay him like X divided by 4. It's just a weird, unique, because we are paying these guys like Jameis Winston, has not done anything in the NFL, and, going off of the reputation of a lot of former number 1 picks, could do nothing in the NFL. And then, but at the same token, Russell Wilson's payoff is about to come in the form of quite a lot of money, I would assume. So there is
I don't think you can reduce the first pick of the draft down to $1 million or $2 million. I think that's, you can control a player like, you could be controlling an Andrew Luck, for that low. That seems like, almost too good for the owners, I would say.
Sure.
The fact that they switched the CBA from the old way, where if you were a bad team, not only were you having the challenge of dealing with having a bad team, but if you missed on your draft pick, you were getting doubly screwed, so to speak. Pardon my language. You're getting doubly screwed. One cap-wise.
Please don't say screwed on this podcast. We do not allow that shit.
You know, you're really getting slammed. Now, if you miss on a player, you're just missing on a player. You're not getting financially devastated as well. So.
Yeah. And, okay, so in another, you know, this week we heard about Bobby Wagner and the Seahawks potentially ramping up talks, and he could be a potential new signing before camp starts as well. What do you think? A lot of people ask me this. What influence or what effect is having a Bobby Wagner sign before training camp starts? How does that affect this Russell Wilson thing?
Well, I think if Bobby Wagner got a $12 million signing bonus, the cap bump would only be about $2 million. So it would take some of the money away from the cap. Now, I show the Seahawks really only having $3 million in actual room right now before cutting someone, because they have like $11 million in dead money, and I'm using that on their who I think is going to make the roster. So there's a little bit of projection in there. Versus if you looked at the number right now in the CBA, you know, they're counting the 51 most expensive players right now. And I'm kind of doing it on the 53 players that I think are going to make the team. So it's a little bit different. And I'm also putting in reserves for IR and practice squad. Now the dead money is counted both ways. So I'm only showing about $3 million in actual room. 75 to the defense, 47 to the offense, about 5 to 6 million for this kicker, punter, and long snapper. So yes, if they were to do a deal with Wagner, now if they found an opportunity to do a deal with Wilson, they would probably have to cut a defensive tackle unless they were somehow going to get the signing bonus really, really low. And now, how would they get the signing bonus really low? I guess if they guaranteed a lot, like it was going to come, you know, and so he felt comfortable that even though I'm not getting my signing bonus, like the money is fully guaranteed,
right,
you know?
Right.
But in reality, I don't think he's going to be happy with a $10 million signing bonus. That just seems too low. So if they were to do Wagner and Wilson, I do think they would have to do something with a defensive tackle or restructure somebody at this point.
Do you see?
But it would be worth it because you're dealing with two of your best players, so it's
yeah.
You saw the opportunity to secure both of those players, you know, in a 1 week period. I mean, you would do it, and you could adjust your cap later. I don't think it's it's just rearranging some furniture a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you could possibly lose a defensive tackle though. That is the other side of it. So it's not totally free money, but long term it could be worth doing if it made sense for Seattle.
Do you see Michael Bennett's situation? Is his if he's really upset, could Michael Bennett cause the Seahawks to not be able to make this deal if he was having to be restructured?
I just don't think they're going to restructure him. I just don't, I just don't think that's. I mean, Michael Bennett's a really good player, and he's probably the best defensive lineman the Seahawks have. But I think in the priority of what they're trying to do over the next 12 to 18 months, I don't think that's a critical priority. I think the higher priorities would be, what Russell Wilson, Bobby Wagner, for sure making their decision on letting Bruce move on. I think maybe the third or fourth decision would be, if we're going to keep Lynch another year, what are we going to do with Okung? I think that would be maybe the fourth or fifth, item on the list. And so I think Michael Bennett it's actually pretty far down the list personally.
And, the other thing that makes this kind of unique situation, in addition to all the other things that we've talked about, is that the cap is growing at such a fast rate these days. And, you can expect it to continue to keep going up. How does that affect this whole thing? Like, do you think Russell Wilson's kind of trying to play the increase in cap to his advantage?
Yeah. I was like really liked econ classes back in college and in grad school, but I forgot a lot of it. But I refreshed myself on that, and inflation is about 2 to 3% a year. and then real GDP growth in a mature country is like 2 to 3% a year. 3 is actually really good. If you had 4, you'd be thrilled. And a lot of times you're bumping around at like 2.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're at 1, now real GDP does not account inflation. It's the actual real, productivity growth of a country. So you figure 2 or 3 for inflation, 2 or 3 for real GDP growth. So if the NFL, which has been growing at 7.5% per year for quite a long time, it's really interesting to think that a sport that's been around for 100 years that really does not have a great market outside of the United States, because Chinese people aren't lining up to play American football. Kids in Africa are not lining up to play American football. Kids in Europe are not flocking, to play American football. It's hard to teach a country and to set up high school teams and peewee and equipment and coaching and all that. It'd be very difficult to launch American football, I think outside of North America. And so, but yet the NFL is growing at this, 8% rate. And I think the revenues that the Green Bay Packers released showed last year they made $188 million from national revenue. And then the latest year after that, they made $226, and that's a 20% jump in essentially national money or TV money. Plus, their local revenue grew by 20%. So yes, I do think that the NFL is growing at a very high rate for a technology that's not new, and I do think Russell Wilson is like a LeBron James in that LeBron James knows the NBA cap is going to bump up next year because I think they also signed a television deal as well. And so he's able to kind of plot his attack of when he's able to, go for money, when he's able to kind of stack his team, so to speak. And I'm not saying Russell Wilson is as dominant as LeBron James, but I think he thinks on a kind of elite level where I think him and Mark Rodgers can study the growth of revenue in the league, and they have a good understanding of where that money is going to flow to, because that money is going to flow to the quarterbacks and to the elite players. Yeah, that's what's going to happen. Because if you're a replacement level player, let's say you're in year 6, and you're not that much better than a guy in his 3rd year who the team's controlling for $600,000, and you're asking for $2 million or $3 million. You're not that rare. And so the team is like, yeah, you're not a bad player, but you're not that much better than this guy can get for $600,000, and you're asking for, $2 or $3 million. But when you get a J.J. Watt, you can't just get another J.J. Watt, in the 4th round or 5th round. So I think the lower end of the vets, I think life is difficult for them, in the new CBA. But players like Russell Wilson who have a lot of power, people like Russell Okung, who's going to negotiate his own contract. But again, he would be in that upper tier of players. They are probably getting more sophisticated. They can also be more long-term and look down the road and study the growth of revenue in the league and be a little bit more savvy than I think 80 to 90% of NFL players who are just battling to make it every year to try to stay healthy, you know what I mean, to try to fend off another player who they know in their heart they're not that much better than that player. They know that the other guy is about as good as I am,
I want to
younger and the team controls them, So I think there's some class dynamics going on in the NFL.
I want to pivot the conversation still on Russell Wilson, but we've talked a lot about the contract, and I think the second half of the show, let's talk a little bit about the player. Davis Hsu said, and I quote, "He's as good as LeBron James." I thought that was an interesting quote, but maybe he was talking about he's as good as LeBron at basketball. But no, seriously, Russell Wilson, these tiers come out from Mike Sando every year. This year, he says he talks to 35 NFL insiders and then crunches the numbers, and Russell Wilson comes out in the second tier of quarterbacks, about 8th best overall. It's hard, it's interesting because in some cases, I think that if there was a player like Russell Wilson that if Russell Wilson was drafted in the top 5, for example, I think it would be hard to keep him out of that first tier. There still seems to be a stigma attached around him because despite the fact that he does not throw it as much, he's probably as much of a volume of the Seahawks offense as, a guy like Drew Brees or Andrew Luck maybe of theirs, just because he converts some of those into runs. But as I sort of noted on Twitter today, did note, his adjusted yards per attempt over the last 3 years combined, only bested by Aaron Rodgers and Peyton Manning. I think, there are other factors go in, and that's when people see the touchdown passes or the yards, and they're like, it's like a mathematician who has to keep going back to the drawing board because he's like, something must be wrong here. He can't be that good. Danny, I want to ask you first, because I think that you said on field goals that you thought that was about right. And how do you feel about Wilson when you watch him play? Does he belong maybe a little bit more credit than he's getting?
Yeah, I think it was fun. It was fun reading that article because on a few of the coordinators and GMs and whoever were talking, definitely very profusely complimentary of Wilson, and talked about how one guy said if he was playing in Drew Brees' system, he'd have just as many yards and touchdowns, and there were a few guys that kind of talked about how his pocket play it's not a problem necessarily, and the other things that he does, make it so much harder for teams to game plan for him. So I thought that was really interesting. But at the same time, I think, number 8 is about right from where I see it. I think he's still an ascending player. He's only played 3 years in the league. I think he can definitely get better. And I think, as he goes out through his career, he's gonna surpass a lot of these guys and probably end up in the top 5, top 3 potentially. And so, but right now, putting him behind Aaron Rodgers, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, and Peyton Manning, that's not like an insult by any means. It just means he's still an ascending player. So to me, I think like anybody, there are things that he can do better. There are things that he can improve on. But I think most people, a lot of fans, at least I think they buy into some of the narratives that they hear about him. He just leans on his run game and his defense, and he's not good. He's a game manager, and I think that's just a bunch of hooey. But and there was even I think there was a coordinator or some maybe it was a GM type guy that talked about how he basically sounded like a fan on Twitter, talking about how he's got a running back and a tight end now, and that'll help him, and he threw four interceptions in the championship game.
This guy sounds like a real jerk with that voice.
Well, it just literally sounded like something that some 49er fan would say on Twitter. But
For sure.
So I think the perception of him is still still varies a little bit. But I think number 8, like I said, I think that's about right. I wouldn't protest if it was 6 or 7 or even 9 or 10. I think it's somewhere in that range, and I think trying to put a number next to it is kind of dumb in the first place because there's so many variables. But overall, I think right now I still see there's things he needs to improve on, and that's not saying he's not any good. That's saying he's really, really good, but he still can be better.
Yeah, Davis, if I pose that same question to you, what do you think about Russell Wilson's placement among the quarterbacks of today? Is it somewhat better? I know that historically Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and Drew Brees, Hall of Fame quarterbacks, but then again, if you looked at their numbers last year, maybe they were losing a step. Maybe a guy like Wilson or Luck is coming up in the world. Do you agree with what Sando had eventually, it's not even Sando's choice. He sort of just asked people and crunches out the numbers. But do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think situationally, I think on first down and second down and 3rd and 3, I think having him, especially paired with Marshawn Lynch, is probably the most devastating combination. I think a very devastating combination. And the reason why on first down, second down, and 3rd and 3 or short is you have 2 game controllers that are very consistent in that they can consistently get, for Lynch, it would be consistent to get 4 yards, even though he's running. And for Wilson, he can complete at a high percentage. His percentage is decent, even though he throws deep. So you have this scary. Plus, he can run and hold the ball, control the ball, and not stop the clock or turn the ball over. So you have these two players that have this explosive element in them, a Russell Wilson and a Marshawn Lynch. Russell Wilson can hit an explosive pass if it's at 16 yards or more. He's good at that explosive run. Let's say that's 12 yards. Well, Lynch is a deadly player, for maybe not an 80-yard run, but he can do that 14-yard run. That's devastating to a defense when they're giving that up. So you have these two consistent and explosive controllers of the game, and you don't know which one's going to have the ball. And the defense doesn't know because you don't know if it's going to be a run by Russell, a run by Lynch, or a pass. And Russell can hit the short and the deep pass. The weakness with Russell Wilson is on third down in a must-pass situation, you've eliminated the run threat to a certain degree. Now, could he convert on a run? Sure, but you've taken away a lot of that threat. And last year on third down, he was a 77.1% passer rating, while on first and second down, he was 101.9 and 102.9. His fourth down numbers were closer to his third down numbers. When you have a guy like Andrew Luck, he was 112.7 on third down, 109.5 on fourth down, 100.5 on first down, and only 80.5 on second down, but that's because he threw 11 picks on second down. So I think situationally, the question of Russell Wilson that I don't think he's ever solved is when you know he's going to throw, where his run threat and Lynch's run threat and the play action has been removed. If he's 77%, I bet you the average quarterback throws over 77 passer rating. I don't know, you can look that up. But 77 quarterback rating is not very impressive. Now, I could care less actually what his rating is. I just want him to convert.
Right, right.
Like, I don't care if you throw a 9-yard pass on 3rd and 10. The defense is more than happy to give up a 9-yard pass on 3rd and 10. But, but his conversion rate on 3rd and 7 and longer for a lot of the season, and I actually charted it all myself, especially in the first half of the season, was really, really poor. And so those are the reasons of possibly why the Seahawks won't just hand over the $75 million. That could be part of it, because on third down, they know. And you look at that Super Bowl and the Green Bay the NFC Championship game, he was not very good on third down. And in the Carolina game, he tore it up on third down. I mean, he was slicing and dicing and hitting him for touchdowns, explosive plays, and conversions on third down.
Yeah, Luke Wilson.
So he does have it in him. But that St. Louis game, Week 17, I believe he was very poor on third down. I believe. I didn't look that up, but I rewatched some of that game. And that game didn't really break until he hit Paul Richardson on the left sideline deep into the third quarter. I think the Seahawks were actually losing that game. And their offense was situationally sputtering. And so I think that's the part of his game in a must-pass situation. See, I don't really care if he's in the pocket or out of the pocket. Like, he's a pocket quarterback. He's not. I don't care. I don't care if he runs to convert every damn third down. Just, do you convert third downs? It doesn't matter if you're in the pocket, out of the pocket, or you run, but can you convert? Now, overall, the Seahawks weren't that bad. They were 42% on third down last year, which is actually better than league average. It was 11th. The league median was 40%. 2013, they were 37th, which was 17th.
37%.
37%, when the league median was 38, and they were 17th.
Okay.
In 2012 was a really interesting year because in the first half of the year, I believe Russell was only, and the Seahawks were only 31% on third down, which would be one of the league's worst. But in the second half of the season, they were closer to 48 or 49%, which would be one of the league's best. And so for the year of 2012, they ended up at 40.
Okay.
But it was like 2 different seasons. So since the second half of 2012, has he been consistently excellent on third down? And I would say no. And so I think that would be the biggest thing I'm looking for. Because I think on first and second down, this is a dangerous, explosive player who can control the game, who can hit explosive plays, who's not going to turn the ball over.
I mean,
who can drain clock. They're just so powerful on first and second down.
I mean, when you look at DVOA, which measures situational plays, situational passing, Russell Wilson, he does so well in so many other categories that are considered, more standard. But in DVOA, he's 14th last year, 13th in DR, and 14th in QBR. There are some.
That's got to be because of third down.
One could say that there are definitely flaws in his game, and it not just maybe even less so in his game, but in his execution. But how much do you see Jimmy Graham changing that this year for Wilson?
I think it's going to be huge. I think everyone talks about the red zone, but the thing about it is the Seahawks are the type of team, if they stick to their formula, they can win a game 19-6, and it's not even close. So what's a 19-6 game? It's a one touchdown and I don't know, how many field goals is that? 4? 4. Yeah. 4 field goals.
Yeah.
They could win that game, and so they could be poor in the red zone, but they have that gap, and they just every little third down they convert, just to drain away another 3 minutes.
It's like death of 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, and then their defense gets on the field and they'll give up some yards, but they're really good in the red zone. Scott told me something a couple years ago, and I totally think it's true. He said third down's more important to the Seahawks offense, and red zone's more important for the Seahawks defense. Obviously, turnovers and explosive plays are the number 1, the number 2 most important things, and that's a mirror image on the offensive and the defensive side of the ball. But Scott made a differentiation between third down and red zone versus offense and defense.
Interesting.
Dictated more toward the style of the Seahawks play and their entirety, their integrated football play, which takes in their special teams, offense, and defense, and the type of game scores that they find themselves in, the game situations. And I do think Scott's right. And so I think that, yes, if Jimmy Graham, obviously scoring touchdowns is a game changer. Obviously, red zone's very, very important. But I think, yeah, if he could be that extra boost to bump third down from 40% to 46%, Seahawks will probably win the Super Bowl. I mean, literally. I mean, they likely will. I think if they were to boost that, because that extra possession, that extra series on a team that's not going to really give up a lot of points if they're healthy, it just really, their ability to control the game is just going to be that much better. And I don't know how he could hurt you on third down. Having him would be
at least as a
quarterback to have a tall target who can jump. I mean, it's kind of hard to shoot holes in that theory, I would think. Plus, you have Doug Baldwin too.
Yeah.
So you got Doug Baldwin and you got Jimmy, and so I think I do think that should help.
What do you think? I know you mentioned you don't care how he converts,
No.
and that actually, I mean, to be clear, that goes against a lot of these traditionalist view of what a quarterback should be in. Like, the Cosell school of quarterbacking is very much like on 3rd and 7, you have to stay in the pocket and throw in the face of a pass rush. And I know that you don't feel that way, and so that that's interesting because, given Wilson's
I don't disagree with Cosell that is probably the best way to convert.
Right. Yeah. But that said,
to be able to be effective by not doing that and somehow convert, I'm fine with that as long as you convert.
I think it's because he's so consistent at scrambling too. It's like, at first we're like, oh, these magic plays, that's not really, something that you can rely on, or that's not something that he can consistently do. But over the years, it's like, and I think even Cosell has admitted this, it's like, wow, maybe these plays where he scrambles around are actually like, in his DNA, it's actually like a consistent thing he can do. And so that's another reason he's kind of.
Pete Carroll says great plays are in him. They're in him.
Yeah.
And it's like a good player. What I noticed, I coach flag football, and I think, like certain players, every game they have great plays in them.
Yeah.
And like LeBron James, he just has great plays in him, and they're gonna come out. It's not a fluke.
Right. Right.
That's why they're great players. It's like Nelson Cruz. He has great. They're in him, or Felix Hernandez or something like that. They have them, and then that's why they're so hyped up, is because every time they show up, the talent's going to come out. and it's not a one-time thing. And so yeah, I do think he needs to improve on third down, but at the same time, there are magical Houdini-type plays in him that he can make every game.
The other thing about those plays, too, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but some of these plays that he makes where the defense, like, has him bottled up and then he gets away and makes a first down, that's so demoralizing for a defense. Like, I can't imagine anything more frustrating than, like, your scheme worked, your pass rushers worked, you got to him, he somehow escapes and makes a first down, and like you said, that bleeds the clock, it bleeds the defense, it helps the defense. So it's like, man, that's just so devastating to defend. And I know that Carroll feels that way too. Like, we've talked about this in the past, like, he hates defending mobile quarterbacks. It's been kind of like his Achilles heel all his career. And
well, I think Belichick, he did a great job against Wilson, and that he never they mush rushed him the whole game. So you look at how bad he was on third down, because they rushed him in a really controlled way. And so you could say, wow, he didn't really have a good game. They didn't complete a pass for like 25 minutes or something, right?
Right.
But at the same time, you look at the end stats of the game, and yeah, the third down was bad, but he was averaging like 20 yards of completion.
Yeah.
20 yards of completion.
Crazy.
And so it's funny that like, and really the Seahawks should have won that game. Like they were that close to actually winning the game. So I totally think Belichick had the right strategy, where he's like, you know what, I'm going to take away his run. I'm going to take away part of his scramble. And yeah, it worked, but yet as the game went on, he was still able to hit.
And they built a 10-point lead at one point. Yep. Yeah.
And he was hitting explosive passing plays where because I don't think he rushed for many yards, if any, in that game.
No, he didn't. He didn't. I don't believe.
So, again, they did lose, but at the same time, it just shows that I think it was a good move by Belichick. But I think that that it showed that he can adapt. And again, he was still able to be effective. But if I were a coach playing against him, I would try that Belichick. I would try to stick with that style. I think it's not foolproof, but again, yeah. I would probably lean toward that.
Davis, you have a very encyclopedic, I think, brain when it comes to the Seahawks games. Basically, prior to this podcast, you sent me and Danny some information, and it was like the football's version of A Beautiful Mind. We're just cranking out.
Oh no, I looked those up.
No, don't just take credit, man. Just take credit. It's funny. Let me ask you this: if you can go through,
awesome.
Go through this and just maybe your gut feeling or whatever. If people were going to have an example, if you could tell a person, if you were making an argument to a person and they didn't think that Russell Wilson was that good, what would be the game that you would show them that said this is Russell Wilson at his best?
Man, I think the game against Arizona in the regular season.
Oh yeah, that was a good one.
Was a pretty good game, and I think going into that game, I had a very strong confidence that he was going to play well. And situationally, the Seahawks actually did not play well. There was a bunch of things that happened early on the game where they actually weren't able to take control of the game as soon as I think they should have. They had some situational mistakes. Some of them could have been other players. Some of them possibly could be Russell. But as the game kind of began to warm up, and then after the Marshawn Lynch run, you saw that play where Wilson's hitting Luke Wilson for big plays. He's
Man,
into him.
Those were some good plays. That's what I was just thinking of too.
But then that little run at the end where he okey-dokes the guy and he goes in and those are like plays. Those look like layups to him. Those are layups to him.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of games like that game where you're thinking. And I think even the Cardinals game. I think maybe it was 2 years ago. It was on Thursday night. And I think
that was the one where he had the crazy throw to Sidney Rice in the corner of the end zone.
Yeah, but I don't even know if that was the best play. I think the play he threw to Zach Miller while he was being tackled.
Oh, the one-handed catch.
Or he was throwing while he was being tackled. It was like a third down.
Oh yeah.
And he converted that. And
I remember that one.
I think possibly that Arizona game.
He plays well down there.
I mean, he played pretty well in the Carolina game in the playoffs, I thought.
Yeah.
You know, third down, he hit, Curse for a touchdown on third down, I believe. Doug Baldwin for a touchdown.
Yeah, that play was
good. He made some big plays to Luke Wilson. And he, but yeah, I think the Arizona game, I think, was kind of the game where
that was the game he had like a 56-yard run or something, like right up the middle, or like right from the goal line. That is just so
another great game was the game against St. Louis in St. Louis that the Seahawks lost. I think it might have been week 7 or something like that, where he had the big long run down the left sideline, where Jeff Fisher did not want to give the ball back to him, so he ended up doing the fake punt on 4th down, which worked, because at that point in the game, if he would have given the ball back to Russell Wilson, and Russell Wilson didn't have Percy Harvin, the team was sort of in this emotional crisis of shock of trading away Percy Harvin, and I think Derek Coleman broke his foot early in the game, and the Seahawks were getting basically clowned, on special teams, and they were trailing.
Yeah.
But I think if you look deeper in that game on 3rd down and certain plays he was making, and just sort of how he kind of took over that game, I also think that shows a lot of what he's capable of. I mean, he was kind of going in that game. He only had really one receiver, it was Doug Baldwin. That was it, really, in terms of having really help, And I think he was. I think that game also showed kind of an underrated game. I think that we kind of forget.
I had one question for you. People have talked about how they basically ignore his rushing yards. He rushed for 800-something yards last year. And I talked to you about this, back in the day, Tom Osborne with Nebraska, they considered every rushing yard worth more than every passing yard. Just because of what we talked about, how it kind of bleeds the defense down and drains them, and as the game goes on, they lose their will to live, essentially. And so, would you, how do you see that? Do you think Russell Wilson's rushing yards are worth more than people probably give him credit for?
Well, I would say his rushing yards don't punish the other team, because he doesn't run in between the tackles, and the team's not blocking. They're not like zone blocking for his rushing,
right,
so to speak. So is his rushing yards physically beating down an opponent like Marshawn Lynch in the 4th quarter? I would say no.
Yeah.
Are there players getting knocked down and getting smushed and pancaked on his runs? I would say no. Do they control the game? Yard for yard, does it control the game better than passing? Yes, especially if you're winning. If you're winning, I don't even know how it could be. Of course, you would rather have 1 yard versus on the ground versus in the air, where you risk stopping the clock or turning the ball over.
Yeah.
So I do think that, yes, a rushing yard, in a sense, could be worth more than a passing yard, because it's less risk for the team that's winning in terms of stopping the clock or turning the ball over.
Davis, finally, I think, speaking of running down the clock, we are running down ours. But some people, a lot of people want to perpetuate this idea that Russell Wilson will leave, or that the Seahawks will trade him, that this relationship will come to an end within the next year because of this contract situation. How stupid or ridiculous is that, or is it not that stupid?
I don't really know. I don't think it's like a situation where in Carolina where they were just going to redo Cam Newton no matter what because he's their team. So, so it's kind of like, what are the chances of them losing Luke Kuechly? I don't think there is a chance, So what are their chances of not re-signing Cam Newton? I would say for the Carolina Panthers, I'm looking at the history of their team, of how they've treated first-round draft picks for 10 to 15 years and what little I know of their team. And I would say there is 0-0 chance. So for the Seahawks, I don't think it would be a scenario like that, because I do think that their front office does think about things in a different way. And I don't know if they ever would take any player and say, there's just no price that we wouldn't pay to keep a player. I do think they do have a max. I do think they would run scenarios and Monte Carlo situations on I'm not saying that they wouldn't franchise tag them, but let's say they were deciding between an exclusive tag or a non-exclusive tag, and you'd think, well, every team would use an exclusive tag on it because they would not risk doing the non-exclusive tag. But I think they would actually run Monte Carlo scenarios for every NFL team, and then run the Monte Carlo scenario of what kind of quarterbacks are there in the draft over a 1, 2, 3 year period. Now that Monte Carlo scenario will probably come back and say you're an idiot, but I think they would actually do that, if that makes sense.
What's a Monte Carlo scenario for those who are uninitiated? Because I don't know what that is.
Monte Carlo is just like a simulator. So it's kind of like what Football Outsiders would do when they run their projections.
Monte Carlo is my drug dealer.
Basically, it's a simulation, essentially, where they would simulate the probability over 10,000, chances, and then they would distribute, and they would kind of come up with a probability.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So it'd be like an analysis of, and so they would say, what are the chances of us landing a quarterback, in round 1 that's of this level? What could we do with the money if we didn't pay him? How could we, synthetically manufacture him? And probably the report would come back and say, you can't do that. There's no way to synthetically manufacture him. But at some price, there would be a way, I guess. If it's like saying, well, I want $100 million per year, and you're going to say, hey, there's just no player worth that much, in pro football, even if you're a quarterback, just because, we need 40 players to suit up, and there's high level of injury, and and the offense doesn't have the ball 50% of the time. And so it's kind of like there has to be these max limits, on the value of any player, even if it's Aaron Rodgers or Peyton Manning, in his prime.
I mean, I cannot think of a single
way. So that's my answer to that question is I think they would look at those things. Now, again, those reports could tell them that $25 million a year is definitely worth it, But I think they would test the limits of where, of what their max would be, and they would think about that. That's kind of how Paul Allen would think, I think, about a situation, And
that's fascinating.
I think Pete Carroll and John Schneider would fall into that, even though they probably already have a strong instinct of what to do,
right,
and what not to do, and how rare a player is. I mean, John Schneider and Pete Carroll, their whole life has revolved around acquiring rare players.
Right.
That's really all their life has really been about for Pete Carroll for 40 or 50 years, and for John Schneider for 20, 30 years. Their entire life is really the quest of acquiring a rare player.
Right.
So
they're not taking this lightly, in other words.
I mean, their whole life is revolved around around that.
Yeah.
I mean, really. Yeah. I mean, if you can't acquire rare players as a GM or a coach, how much of percent of your job is that? 60% of your job?
Yeah.
70%? I mean, I don't know. I would guess over 50% of your job is on acquiring and retaining and maintaining a rare player. Obviously, there's other important things: your scheme and your culture, and your logistics, and all those other things.
Sure,
I think are really important. But I think, I would think that would be very, very high on that list. What their life's all about. So I think they know how rare he really is, and so, but at the same time, they know his flaws better than the fans as well.
True.
Right.
So they know all the third downs that he didn't convert, that they were sitting there for him.
Yeah, and they know why. Yeah.
They know the play was designed right, the look was right, and he just
why didn't he look there?
Passed on it. And they have a whole list of these scenarios where they know where, hey, this is all set up, and for some reason you didn't let go of the ball.
Right.
And so they know that in a way that, as fans, we don't know, because we don't know the progression of the play. We don't know, all the different intricacies of the route and the protection that type of thing. So I think in their mind, it is very clear kind of where, their the flaws of his game. I think they're again, they know that very, very much as well.
I want to thank Davis for coming on the show, talking to Russell Wilson. Earlier in the show says rumblings that Russell Wilson wants $75 million fully guaranteed. Maybe the Seahawks are ready to go up to $61 million fully guaranteed. Davis, anything else you want to throw out there that maybe you've heard through the grapevine regarding this?
No, I mean, I gave it to you. That's what we had heard, and so I haven't really anything since except what's on Twitter and what's been reported on the big outlets and on radio. So.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone for listening to the Reel in the Field Goals podcast. Danny, any final thoughts?
No, that was a lot of great information, and we're coming down to the wire here in terms of what we can expect with Russell Wilson. So hopefully next week we'll have something to actually some football to talk about. But that was really great. Holistic look at the whole situation, I think. And so thanks again for coming on, Davis.
Yep. Absolutely. Thanks for coming on, everybody. Listen to Reel on the Field Goal. Subscribe on iTunes. Tell a friend, and listen next week. Bye.